Hello there. I am glad you could make it today. Um, we are in the process of wrapping up the story of Abraham and Sarah. But as we see, when it comes to God's story, the story continues, even though some of the people who are a central part of it will come and then they will go. And in this case, what we have is the point where uh, Abraham and Sarah have had their son Isaac, and he is now grown up. He has got to be 37 years old. He's still living with them and the servants, and he's grown up. He's learned what he needs to learn. At this time, Sarah's about 127 years old, and it's no surprise that she dies at this time. And this puts into motion a few things that have to happen. And this kind of spurs Abraham, I think, because he realizes that, okay, definitely this is the only child we're going to have, as if there were any doubt before, or if there had been any doubt before. This is now settled. So they have this one son, and in order to fulfill what God has predicted, then um, Isaac is going to need to get married and have children. Well, with Sarah dying, Abraham gets with the Canaanites in whose land they live, and he wants to buy a cave to bury her in. That was pretty normal in those days to use a cave. And the people there really like him and they want to give him a place. But he kind of insists, I really want to pay for this. And there's kind of a funny, longer story into how this all works out. But finally, in picking out the one that he would like, because they say, well, you can pick out whichever one you want, he gets the person who owns it to tell him how much it is worth. And the cave also comes with some land around it and trees that encircle the area. And once he tells him what it's worth, then Abraham pays for it. Everybody is looking on and they approve of it. So now this is always going to belong to Abraham and his descendants. And I think that's one of the things he's looking for is that he's no longer a stranger who is just living in this area. He is there to stay, and that's his way of marking that. So Sarah is buried in the cave, and now it's time to see about getting Isaac married. In that time, pretty much you didn't have people picking who they wanted to marry. Normally, it was set up by the families. Usually, the patriarch of the family, which would be father or grandfather, somebody like that who was respected, would know the history and the reliability of the other families, and they would get together at this high level and they would determine, okay, I have this son, you have this daughter, and so we're going to arrange them to be married. Uh, the people getting married didn't have a whole lot of say in all of this. So Abraham has a little bit of a problem because he does not want Isaac to marry one of the Canaanite women. He has seen firsthand that the Canaanites just aren't into following God, and even though he can be friends with them and have good relations with them, he does not want that influence for his son and for the line of people that God has promised. Abraham, you would think, okay, he's pretty old because he's like 137 at this time. So he should uh, be a major part of this going and finding the right wife. But he's not leaving the promised land. He knows God has promised him this land, this area that he's in. And it seems like even though he's old, his real reason for staying is that this is the land God has promised. I'm not leaving it. However, he does have, well, he has a large number of servants, but he has one in particular who is the head of the household in that he takes care of everything. Abraham trusts him above everybody else, and he sends the servant back to the area that he came from. It's Mesopotamia. It's the land between the rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates. It's where he had come from originally. And he sends his servant there and says, okay, let's load up some camels and take some presents back, and I want you to find a wife for Isaac. Well, this servant is very good, and he takes the responsibility. He wants to do this right. And so, as he's getting closer, um, since he is also following God, he sees the place where the camels can be watered, and it's close to where uh, Abraham's relatives live. So he knows he's going to meet somebody in this area who will either fit the kind of person that Isaac needs or will know somebody like that. So he is praying to himself, and it's very specific. Um, he's going to ask one of the women if he can have a drink from her jar of water, because the women would go down and fill their jars with water for the people of the household. They would take it back. It's very similar to the way my mother grew up, living out in the country. They would go to a spring and collect water that they needed to drink. A lot of people would have wells, but sometimes the wells were not deep enough for the water to be clean enough to drink, so you would go to a specific place. And that's what happened here. And his prayer, though, the servant's prayer, is that when I ask her for a drink, she will offer to water my camels as well. Well, that's a pretty good thing to pray for because of the kind of rules of hospitality under which people lived. They would fulfill a request, but this is going beyond what he asked for, and um, shows a kindness in the person if this woman does this. Well, exactly as his prayer goes, it happens. Rebecca comes down. Turns out that she's actually the great niece of Abraham because she's kind of the granddaughter of Abraham's brother. And this family is a good family. They are following God, at least to some extent, because they have great respect for Abraham and what he has done. Well, she comes down and he asks for water. She does exactly what he had prayed for, and she waters the camels. And he prays to God, thanking him for this, and he gives her gifts. He gives her two gold bracelets, one for each wrist, and a gold ring. And you go, what kind of ring? How do we know it will fit? Ah, but this ring is made for her nose, not her fingers. And he puts it right on her there, and he's telling her some things about who he is and where he's from. And she goes back to her house, and her brother comes out. Laban is actually kind of running things now, even though his father is still alive. And he comes down to talk to the servant, and the servant gives him more detail of why he's there. And he's asking for a place to stay. And Laban says, sure, come on up. And they start preparing food, and he's welcomed in. His camels are taken care of. And the servant comes right out and says, okay, this is what happened. And he tells the whole story about what he prayed to God and how it turned out, how Rebecca had responded. And they go, well, okay, we have no problem with that. She can go with you and be married to Isaac. That's fine. Now, there had been kind of a stipulation, well, not stipulation, more of a conversation that the servant had with Abraham. And since Abraham wasn't going, he said, what if the woman won't come with me? And Abraham more or less told him, well, you go and do all the introductions, and if it still doesn't happen, I'm not going to hold you responsible. You don't have to do anything else. Just promise me that you will try to get a wife for Isaac. Okay, So everything works out, and they talk to Rebecca, and she's okay with this. Not sure why, but they do know that Abraham has done very well for himself, and that would have been seen at that time as a sign that God has blessed them. So she wouldn't be quite as nervous about things. Plus, being the custom in that day and time, it would not be that unusual for a woman to be expected to go off far away to marry someone where it's been arranged. So she's prepared to go. Now, her brother and father want her to stay for 10 days or so. And I guess it's kind of a, well, this is a good chance for you to say goodbye and wrap things up. And the servant goes, well, we really need to go because this is what we're doing for God. And my master Abraham has said to take care of this. And they ask Rebecca, and she says, I'll go. So they load up and head out. Now, this is not a quick journey. It was over 500 miles to get from where Abraham lived to where Rebecca lived. So the servants made it one way, and now they're both going to have to go back. Of course, she has some servants of her own with her, and it appears that Abraham's servant did as well. And that would be important because this area could be dangerous, and you would not want to travel alone or with just a few people. So they head on back. Now, Isaac is back. This has been at least 2 months at the rate of travel that people make. This has been at least 2 months, but he's going out, and we're not sure if he's there to meditate or if he's anxious to see them coming back, but he spots them at a distance. Meanwhile, Rebecca spots Isaac at a distance and says, is that the guy? And the servant says, yes. So she pulls her veil up. And that's what they would do customarily, is wear the veil, if not all the time, at least while they are engaged up until the marriage. So they go through with the wedding. Everything is fine. And we find out that Isaac absolutely loves Rebecca. In the Bible, you don't have a lot of instances. In fact, some people say this is the only one where you have someone, well, a couple getting married where there's love involved. Normally, it's just the arranged marriage. Now, I will say something else about that. People still do arranged marriages these days, and it sounds kind of odd to us because we're used to people loving each other and getting married. Had someone describe it this way as, you Americans, because this person was from India, you Americans marry the women you love. In India, we love the women we marry. So that's an interesting way to look at it. But in any event, um, they are married, everything is going on, and Abraham's going to live another 35 years. So he probably was not sickly at the time. He just didn't want to leave the promised land. Well, now, because he didn't have to have Isaac leave, Isaac can stay there and things can move ahead. So, um, trusting in God is the key part in all of this because God has made a promise, you believe it, you live up to the things He expects from you. Okay, with that, I'm going to let you go. I wore this tie today because it's my heart tie, or one of my heart ties, indicating the love that Isaac had for Rebecca. So, hope to see you next time.